In animation, the Microsoft logo bursts into clear concentric windows. Colorful, rounded fabric squares converge, spiraling upward. Microsoft. Ability Summit. Building for the brain. Designing for cognitive inclusion. Christina Mallon, Doug Kim, Kathy Bodine, PhD, Jen White Johnson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a discussion on building for the brain, designing for cognitive inclusion. I'm your host today, Christina Mallon, and I use the pronouns she, her. I'm a neurodivergent inclusive designer with dual arm paralysis, currently leading inclusive product at Microsoft. We're hosting this discussion today because this toolkit is going to be a part of how we design for cognitive inclusion. We're releasing this toolkit as a part of our ongoing journey with the accessibility evolution model. We hope that this can be a resource for your organization and yourself to accelerate your own progress in accessibility and disability inclusion in a sustainable way. We're lucky to be joined today by experts in the field of cognitive inclusion in design and engineering. Our first guest today is Jen White Johnson, who's an artist and a professor with ADHD and Graves' disease. She uses inclusive design and photography as a means to discuss the intersection of disability rights and anti-racism, and to give visibility to misrepresented voices. Some of her notable works include the Black Disabled Lives Matter symbol, which I'm wearing right now, and a Black Autistic Joy advocacy zine called Knox Rocks. And our second guest is Kathy Bodine. She's the executive director of the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities and a professor of bioengineering at University of Colorado. And she's also a nationally recognized leader in assistive technology. And my last panelist is Doug Kim, and he's the principal content designer and is leading inclusive design for Microsoft Azure. He was a founding member of the first inclusive design team that created the award-winning inclusive design toolkit at Microsoft. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Doug, the first question is for you. You were a key contributor to the inclusive design toolkit for cognition. To address cognition, you say to start with motivations. Can you explain your thoughts behind that framing?
Doug Kim.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Margaret Price, who's really one of the leading thinkers behind this work. And she really felt that it was important for us to start with motivations. And it's for a couple of different reasons. Like often as product designers, technologists, engineers, we go into a product development cycle thinking and talking about the possibilities that technology can give us, especially in this new era where we'll get into a little bit later about generative AI. There's a tendency to just say, okay, what can this particular thing do, feature, device, technology, whatever it is. And what that does is sort of forgets the human aspect of it and leaves the human basic motivation and desires out of it. And once we do that, we end up with something that, maybe has a cool functionality, but isn't really super useful for the customer or the user in the end, especially when you get into cognition, cognitive abilities. There are so many different motivations that are blocked and are difficult to achieve with a conventional way or one way of thinking about solving a particular problem. So it's really important to start with a basic motivation. Like if you have, for example, this desire to create a new world, say you're a creative person and you want to create a fictional world that's really immersive, that's your basic motivation. But you may want to realize that by doing that through a video game, and you may have a bunch of tasks that are set up for you to be able to achieve that. If we always have that motivation in mind, we can create an experience that allows you to really keep that motivation close to your heart and center and keep you motivated throughout whatever cognitive demands and loads that you may encounter. So we really work with product teams to think about what it is that I'm really trying to encounter here, or what am I really trying to achieve. It really gives me that emotional drive and that will to overcome any cognitive load or demand that we may encounter and really create the thing that we're really trying to create. Otherwise, the obstacles that we put in the way might be too great, or the way of thinking of it might be too great. We might just end up really distracting people from where they really want to go.
That's a really smart way to frame it. And Kathy, something similar, in one of our co-creation sessions, for this toolkit, you mentioned a great quote by Dr. Bruce Baker. And that quote was, "For any task to be successful, motivation has to equal or surpass cognitive load." Can you explain the meaning of that quote and why it stuck for you for so long?
Kathy Bodine.
That quote, motivation has to equal or exceed cognitive or physical effort, really stuck with me because it puts into context this notion that, as Doug said, technology and being motivated is really critical. But the key thing is if we make a task too difficult cognitively, or perhaps a sensory system, vision, hearing, or physical, you can't do it. So it's really key that we balance that need and that desire of someone to succeed in whatever task they're doing with how hard we make it for them. And particularly for individuals with cognitive disabilities, or even those of us that are in a situationally induced cognitive disability, meaning there's too much distraction behind us, or perhaps we're tired or we have a cold. If we make the task too hard, there's nothing our motivation can do to help us succeed. And so that really crystallized for me. And I live with that. I always think about how much am I suppressing someone's motivation by making this task difficult for them.
Yeah, and it really puts, the responsibility in the hands of the builder and the designer. I really love that quote, and so excited to be such a instrumental quote in the toolkit itself.
Thanks. Yeah, it means a lot, I think. And if we can all embrace that, we'll question everything we do, and we'll make sure that motivation can succeed.
I really hope that catches on, especially with our readers. Jen, we know in the toolkit the importance of ensuring that co-collaborators belong to multiple communities. Can you talk about intersectionality considerations when designing for cognition?
Jen White Johnson.
Sure. Yes. Great question. Just as a Black disabled woman who uses tech for creativity, I think it's important to note the intersection between race and disability in this conversation. Black disabled writer Audre Lorde says that we don't live single-issued lives. And Black women are often disallowed disability, and their survival is often depoliticized. As tech creators, we're not actively allowed to be our full, authentic, disabled selves at times. And so it's so important to note and to credit the Black feminist disability framework, which really helps to inform my work and my activism, that specifically says that we must take up intersectionality to argue that a single issue approach to designing for disability fosters pitfalls, if we don't center intersectionality, further perpetuating those inequities within accessible tech. Just understanding, the value that is placed on Black and brown bodies as being, these builders of products when they're not necessarily given the room to build in the most authentic way because of systemic oppression, because of inequitable access to tech. We're placing these very ableist, societal norms on them when we're not allowing for them to fully be disabled within the workforce.
No, I definitely agree. And that's why, some of the learnings that I've gotten from you about intersectionality, we had to put in the toolkit because I think it's just something that people don't realize and don't know because of the systemic ableism and racism within the education system. So thank you so much for adding that color to, intersectionality within cognition.
Great. Yeah, it's important. It's pillar. Intersectionality is pillar to, what this toolkit is really meant to provide and to uplift because of so much stigma that continues to complicate, acknowledging that cognitive disabilities, are present. And if we can't really acknowledge it, then we're erasing it from the conversation. So I'm so thankful that the toolkit is existing and that is, wanting to uplift body minds authentically.
Thank you for that. And we took that lens as much of, a lot of this work that I've learned about intersectionality is influenced by your work. within the framework for cognitive inclusion because it is so important to get that intersectional lens. So I wanted to move on to implementation because, this is all great in theory, but it's important that it can be implemented. So I want to open up this question for everyone, but we'll start first with Doug for the answering. How do you get companies, universities, and brands that you do work with to care about cognitive inclusion and integrate into their current processes? Doug, over to you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and change is hard. It's never easy, no matter what it is that you're trying to move a company, organization, or whatever it is, in a different direction. But it takes, I think, a couple things. One is it just takes somebody inside that company, some of that organization, who is passionate. I think we all, whether we realize it or not, have encountered some person, or maybe it's ourselves, right, in our lives, who has a cognitive disability, or is neurodivergent, or has some maybe mental health issues that have affected their ability to do the things that they want to do, or have encountered difficulty with the experiences that they're expected to use every day. So it just takes one person who's passionate and who really wants to drive and lead and help evangelize this work within their company or their organization to really build up the momentum that they need. And I've heard many stories from people who feel recognized and feel seen by the fact that we're talking about these issues openly, and that we're saying to them, it's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. The problem is with the experiences that we're building that don't conform to the way that you want to think and the way that you want to achieve the things you want to achieve. That's where the issue is. And so when you get one person or one group of people who speak that way and can evangelize that message within their companies and organization, it's really powerful. When you start telling stories, it's really powerful. The other thing is to recognize that this isn't an add-on. It's not an additional layer of work that is an extra cost or an extra step in the process that you have to say, oh, okay, well, I can't afford to do that right now because times are tight, or where a company is very zeroed in on this particular thing. This is the main entree. This is the way you should be working. This is the way that we should be developing everything. Because, like I said before, everyone encounters this. Your audience for this work is everyone. Everyone has a different way of approaching things. Everyone has a different way of conceptualizing things in their brain and making it work for them. And we need to move beyond the area where we just have one way to think about a given experience. And we need to make room for so many other different people to plug in and have that experience work for them the way they want it to work. So it's not an add-on, it's a replacement. It's the way we should be doing everything, and the way we should be understanding our customers, and the way we should be building services and products for them. It's a combination of those two things. Like, is there somebody who feels seen? Your customers, especially. And can we think of this as a replacement for the way we do everything? I lead the inclusive design experience team for Azure, but my hope is that it won't be a single team, that it'll be every team.
It's a new way to design and build experiences. And I think, Doug, your work has been crucial for that implementation into products in Azure. So Jen and Kathy, I'd love to understand, both of you work with brands and universities, to understand kind of how do you get people to care, and how have you integrated into your current processes?
Thank you. Well, it's an interesting thing. And so a little, I'm a scientist, so I have to go for the facts, So a little slightly known, not really talked about thing that happened in 2020. I think the pandemic kind of overshadowed this a bit. But in 2020, for the first time in our world's history, people over the age of 65 exceeded the number of children under 5. So by 2050, India will be our youngest country. What does that mean? When you think about it, what that means is that we're dealing with a demographic that is older for the most part. So as we age, our brain changes. It's just part of what happens, and how we think, how fast we think, what we perceptually experience changes. And so one of the things that we're doing that I think has been really powerful is a project that started in the Netherlands, and it's called an age-friendly campus. And so 3 of our 4 campuses have already been designated as age-friendly. What that does is it builds awareness, and it starts with our president, top down, bottom up, where we start to understand that in lifelong learning, we all change over time, and we have to change in order to accommodate all the folks that are going to be visiting our campus, that are going to be engaging in learning and that type of activity. So that's been really powerful. Now, when it gets into design and those types of things, it causes everyone to stop for just a minute and have that refresh and think about what they're doing. What I'm seeing in terms of our product testing lab, our user experience lab, because we're very focused on user-centered design and human-centered design. We don't do anything without these people in the room with us. It's very critical. And so by incorporating these individuals into our work, our students are learning right away how they need to think and how they need to design. So that's a very important thing for us. And we're seeing more and more companies coming to us saying, we need your help. And I think to Doug's point, we're beginning to embed. We're at the very beginning of this process, but we're seeing it embedded more and more in industry as well as academia. And it's really exciting.
That's so great to hear. I can't wait to check out that campus.
We're coming along. It's work to be done.
Hey, it isn't everything. And Jen, over to you.
Yeah, and I mean, just to, uplift everyone's comments, much of the Black experience in design as students, as faculty, one of the things that I tell my students as they're preparing for brand projects, one of the things that I also walk into the corporate brand spaces that are, valuing my body as a labor force, that where disability is very much undervalued, not celebrated, making sure that we understand that Black bodies shouldn't be viewed as a productive labor force, because we're leaving little room for an identity-based approach to disability. And that's why designing for cognition is going to continue to be important in terms of like how we, uplift this message of impact with tech, because, Black people can't always afford to be disabled in the workforce, when they're required to be able-bodied and, productive in a very white supremacist society and space. And so it's just really important that we continue to value those relationships, and that Black disabled bodies don't necessarily feel compromised, that they feel like their exchanges with this tech, that their body minds are being amplified through the way that they're responding to experiencing this opportunity to engage. That's not rooted in ableism. That's not rooted in, okay, well, if I'm learning new tech, if this tech is built for me, is it mostly, idealized for my body to generate capital? Or is this technology just really celebrating the way that my mind works so that I can create a larger, bigger space that celebrates who I am and the people, that are like me? Because, so much of what we do is very much rooted in stigma, and that continues to complicate, what cognitive disability represents, and the fact that it's present. So, access for the sake of, Mia Mingus, like I really love, when she says access for the sake of access or inclusion is not necessarily liberatory, but access done in the service of love, justice, and connection and community is liberatory and has the power to transform. So ultimately, that's what this designing for cognition means, that we're transforming the way that tech can embody a language that disabled folks have been speaking for quite some time. But how can we continue to transform the way that we integrate that tech with our minds and the way that we use the technology?
I love that. And really hoping that, the Inclusive Design for Cognition Toolkit allows for everyone to understand how to do that, implement it so that they can have that freedom, because everybody deserves to be able to, reach their motivations and fulfill their motivations, no matter, your race, your sexuality, your gender, your disability. And I think the work that you three are doing is extremely instrumental in allowing for that. So we're going to move on. I would love to understand kind of what excites you. What do you think is the future of cognitive inclusion in design and engineering? And Doug, I'll kick this off to you.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. Well, first, I have a couple of I think powerful reactions to some of the things that Jen was saying. It's so important for us to think about or to leave behind this idea that there's some normal that we primarily designed for, and that looking at things like intersectionality or accessibility or inclusiveness for cognition is somehow some 10% or 5% or 2% thing of our audiences that maybe we'll get to at some point. We have to understand that the idea that there's a normal that we primarily designed for is kind of a false construct. The truth is that intersectionality should be a part of our thinking as our primary audience and our primary target for who we should be building these products and services for. And once you embrace that, then you understand that the work is continuing, but really the core and the main part of the things that we should be striving for. So that's a key thing. But to your question, that sort of introduces a lot of questions like, okay, if we are living in this enormously complex world where no two people are alike, and our understanding of how they're different and how they approach things and their other factors that they deal with, like race, ethnicity, disability, factor into that. Well, how do you do that? So I think we're in this era now where more and more of that understanding, that complexity, is becoming enabled by brand new technology. The latest thing, of course, that we're talking about is ChatGPT, the OpenAI stuff. Generative AI is another term that we use for that. And what that really allows us to do, or potentially allows us to do, is to design experiences that really understand context. It can understand the context of where you are, what you're doing. You can work with those experiences to have something that really is suited for what it is that you want to do, taking into account that the factors that are very unique to you. This has always been the problem. My background in technologies and content, and we could only go so far, like handcrafting, say, a help article in understanding what your context was. Because really, that help article has to be consumed by thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. But with the advent of chatbots, and now this new era of chatbots, there's an ability for us to understand much more about your particular context and your particular way of thinking. It also can be weaponized in a way. There are pitfalls here. Like, again, if we just think about it as a technology that we can just plug into stuff and make it cool, it's not going to work for that purpose. And in fact, could be destructive in perpetuating bias and inequity, because it's only as good as the data that you put into it. So I think more now, this inclusive work is really important, because when we start with the motivation, we start with the right ideas about building things that are equitable for all people, and with that motivation to create that better context for no matter what your particular situation is when you're coming into an experience, then the possibilities really unlock to create much more equitable experiences for everyone. And that's now possible in a way that it's never been before.
I'm excited to see this reflected in a lot of the products that come out at Microsoft and around the world, especially with that point of view. We talk about human and tech interaction. What about you, Jen? How are you feeling? What are you feeling excited about? What are you concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling, like Doug was saying, like I'm feeling that, I want to continue to believe that, designing for cognition in mind is radical and that it's liberatory, and that we have to make space for that freedom, so that Black and brown folks who live on the margins, who identify as disabled, even non-disabled, who have temporary disabilities, who are accidentally disabled and they're adapting to like this new way of life, that we have to keep into account those co-occurring conditions, comorbidities that really impact the way that they access information, the way that they learn. And I just want to continue to make sure that the toolkit, isn't just an inclusive thing, as Doug was saying, like that it's an add-on, but that we can continue to make sure that the toolkit, works as a radical act of tech to help dismantle those access barriers. That what use is tech if it doesn't respond to those types of comorbidities, those temperamental like aspects of of anxiety that one day we're feeling good, and this goes to, back to what Kathy was saying early on, what's the overall environment, what's the overall vibe, what's the overall mood that I'm engaging with this tech, because that's going to impact my overall delivery and productivity. And if we're not taking that into account, especially the way that Black and brown people can access tech to begin with, who's to say that they're working on the latest version of Windows? Who's to say that they're working on older aspects of software or open source software, because they don't have the equitable financial access to be able to use the toolkit, and so I just really love that we're helping to continue to transform and to shift, how we can continue to build, with the disabled community, not just for them.
I love that. Co-creation is key. And I think on the work that we're all doing, it is really at the core. And adding that layer of intersectionality only makes it better and better for more people. I'd love to hear kind of what you're thinking about, Kathy.
Oh, gosh, so much. So I think what really excites me is thinking about next generation engineers. Engineers are problem solvers. Give them a problem, they're going to come up with a solution no matter what. But today's engineers have a much broader spectrum of knowledge that's required. So, for example, in our inclusive design curriculum, one of the things we do is we not only immerse our students in our clinic and the community and all these crazy places where real people live and work, but we also do things like teach anatomy and physiology. You have to understand how the human body works and certainly how the brain works and how change can occur over time. So to me, this next generation of designers, engineers, etc., they have more to learn than perhaps the last generation of engineers thought about. And if we're going to be successful in our design and in all these principles that we're talking about, it's going to be very important for us to ensure that our designers and engineers get the education that they really do need and the exposure to this wide range of people who all perform differently at different times. And I think it's exciting because I've been waiting my whole career for tech to be where it is today. I'm very excited about that. And I tell my students, I don't even know what you're going to be doing. I have no idea what your job is going to look like. I have no idea how these tools are going to evolve, but you're going to be a part of that process. So inclusive design matters because we can't leave anyone behind. And I agree wholeheartedly with what's been said in terms of it's, this old quote from many years ago, nothing about us without us, that matters. And so having my engineers get over their fear of talking to someone who's different. That's one of the most important things I think we do is help them to see people as peers and colleagues that they might not have thought about before. And so that whole notion of problem solving and how we train our next generation of engineers to embrace that is pretty cool. So that's what I'm excited about.
That sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
So,
it's fun.
As we wrap up, I want to give you each the platform to, get your message out there, or one thing you want viewers to do after, listening to this panel. Who wants to go first?
You know what? I love what Jen was saying about radical active tech, right? It is today. Today it's radical. And the things that we're doing collectively on this panel and beyond, the people gathered here and the people paying attention, we're in. We're in on that act of radicalness. But our hope is that it's not going to be radical. Like our hope is that in the very short future, that none of the things that we're talking about will be out there in the way they maybe are today, or new in the way they are today. Our hope is that it's going to be the way that everybody does everything in terms of creating products and services that anybody else is going to consume. And I think the call to action now is to understand that there's so much diversity in the way that we approach the things that we want to do and need to do. And we need to honor that and build for it, design for it, and understand that this is the way that we ourselves actually work. So I guess my hope is that what's radical today won't be radical tomorrow.
I like that.
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. And that's why, I feel like this toolkit is a reflection of understanding that disability is not a monolith, that we don't exist in a silo. We don't have to exist in a silo to create collective liberation, and viewing, accessible tech as a form of resistance, as a form of activism. And I feel like it's going to continue to be that way because there are constant forces, systemic oppression, socioeconomic statuses that are meant to keep people away from this tech so that they can't, as Kathy was saying, so that they can't achieve, the next step of transformation. It's unfortunate that, that there is a war on, access, so that certain people from certain, status and certain disabilities, certain, sexual orientations, certain ways of existing are meant to not have access to those radical liberatory tools. Because if you give them, and it's just like any disabled person, if you give them access, believe me, they're going to build something magical. They're going to build something completely transformative. And so that's what I really love, that the toolkit helps to enforce, and it has to be the pillar, going back to intersectionality. And so when ableism and notions of disability are a major component of anti-Blackness, it's clear to be pro-neurodiversity. And that's what I say. So to be pro-neurodiversity is in essence to be anti-racist. Thus making sure that equitable design, the way that we access tech for cognition, must be the center of an intersectional anti-racist lens. You have to remember that not all people have access to equitable technology. Think about when the pandemic hit. How many kids didn't have access to equitable tech? They were relying on being in school to use technology so that they could have access to research, to learn about the world, how to exist in a certain sense. There were kids who were waiting weeks and weeks and weeks just to have a laptop so that they can continue learning, so that they could feel connected to their classmates. Think about all of those kids who identified as disabled, like my son. We were fortunate. We were privileged. We honestly didn't even wait for the school system to provide that tech to our son. We just went out and bought a Chromebook, and called it a day. And at one point they were sending kids 2 devices because they were losing track on who had what device, what was sent out to what was sent out to one kid wasn't sent out to another. Kids had to return devices. And then, of course, like I was teaching at Bowie State University at the time, and there were tons of students that were on wait lists who, again, were relying on the lab in the studio on campus to make sure that they can access tech like this. But, they were under a lot of duress, and they didn't really have that access. So that's really what I'm hoping. And we're talking about Bowie State University, which is the oldest historically Black college in Maryland. So when you really look at, the reduction of, funds that have been, given to historically Black colleges and universities, they've been underfunded. And this has been documented for centuries, which is why Black people had to create their own institutions to begin with, because they were valued less than. So you can imagine how many Black and disabled students during the pandemic were impacted by inequitable tech and inaccessible technology. And so we have to continue to realize that what we're building here serves a much bigger purpose than, I think Doug had mentioned it, or maybe Kathy, like where we're just creating something cool. This is an act of resistance. So tech as resistance. Yeah.
I need that into a t-shirt. Please make it, Jen. Because that line.
I'm getting goosebumps.
No, and I think it definitely starts in education. And how do you kind of take out the ableism, racism that has been within the education systems? And I think, both yourself and Kathy are really leading the charge there. So Kathy, I'll leave you to give the last bit of goodness here.
Okay, so my last bit of goodness. I want to echo something Doug said earlier, and that is this toolkit is a first, right, for cognitive accessibility. And we expect and anticipate it will change over time as tech changes, as we learn more, all those cool things. So, keep checking back. I imagine you'll see lots of really cool things. But beyond that, I think for the designers in the room, if you can think about cognition as a continuum, and if you can think about that, going back again to where we started with this notion of motivation has to exceed or equal cognitive and physical access, if you can think about all the ways that we shift throughout the day when we're using these tools, and if you can think about design as a way to keep that motivation up so that people will be successful, so that they can move forward with the tasks they need to do. And to Jen's point, people, sometimes they just need to bank online. That's it. And it needs to work for them. So if you can think about that continuum of accessibility as you're designing, you can't, quote, save the whole world with one feature, right? But think about how accessibility is along a continuum. Just as we fluctuate throughout the day, so do people with cognitive impairments. And so if you can really hold that to your heart and really think about that, I think you'll do an incredible job in design.
So, thank you so much, Kathy. I think it was a really good point. This is ongoing. Things will change. And that's why, and when we look at the tool, this is just the first iteration. We will build on more, talk about intersectionality more, but wanted to get it out there to give a basics and a 101 because it's such a new and needed topic to be discussed. So I want to thank you all for taking the time. The three individuals, you are so busy, and it is such a pleasure and a luxury to share this space with you, and want to thank you from the bottom of my heart as someone who is neurodivergent. Your work is life-changing, and please continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
Awesome. If anyone's looking for, thank you, Doug. If anyone's looking for the toolkit, it's on inclusive.microsoft.design.
Participants smile. Inclusive.microsoft.design. Microsoft. Thank you for participating. There's more to experience. Explore other content experiences in the top navigation bar. In animation, an L-shaped curve of rounded fabric squares undulates softly.